BBC Learning Zone peels away the mask now to discover how British TV captured the zeitgeist of the swinging 60s.
Everybody loves a Lord. Nights a tenpenny so. How soon will poor Sir Alec wish his title could be restored?
Television was a vital component in the Cultural Revolution in 60s Britain. In 1961, 75% of families had a television set. By the end of the decade, 90%. Economic security and educational reforms of the 40s and 50s had created a new cohort of young people. A potentially disturbing representation of working class life came in a comedy series, also begun in 1966, Till Death Us Do Part. The central character, Alf Garnett, was a reactionary bigot.
Bung your glass in front of me nose. I know it's my turn, don't I? Cheers on it.
The show was written by Johnny Speight, who was himself brought up in the East End. It was a huge success and attracted an audience of 18 millions.
Have to, won't you? Because if you want large vodka, Sonny Jim, you wait till it's your bloody turn, see? Because while I'm buying them, you're having beer, same as you had last
Yes, man, I can't drink any more beer. It's coming out of my ear holes. I can't drink any more. Yes, a large vodka.
The open use of racist language is even more shocking today than it was then.
That's all right, serve a Sambo first. I mean, the Coons was here first, Oh, me and my girl. What's up with you?
He was around in the East End where I was brought up, and all around in the society I lived in. I saw all these Alf Garnets with their half-formed views, their ignorance of and colour. Racism is a kind of ignorance. I mean, you cannot. How you can attack a man just because of the colour of his skin? I don't know. That's what they were doing because they didn't know the person they were talking about, and so I gave him all. It was a composite, I suppose, of all the people I detested most in society, and he became the most lovable, one of the most lovable people in society. It makes me wonder if we are perhaps still a very bigoted nation.
It's very strong stuff. I mean, you could almost say there's not just a frankness, there's almost bad taste.
You know what gives you away, didn't you?
What's that?
It's all them holes in your face. Take my advice, Sonny. You'll get some trial in cement and fill them all in.
Well, I was trying to write about people as I saw and observed them, and they're the things, that's how they were. And I think the proof of that was that Elf's popularity struck a lot of chords in people. Most women told me he was their husband, like their husband.
Right.
And most children told me he was like their father or their grandfather.
Right.
And all his chauvinism and that kind of thing. But that wasn't all his fault. It was the society being educated. I use the term loosely here, but the schools he'd gone to, and he'd grown up in that kind of atmosphere.
Look, leave her alone, you dirty scuzzgit. He's eating her here, isn't he? Get off. Listen, Joe. Listen, fella. Shut up. Fella told me up here. Marvellous joke. You remember the by-election they had a few weeks ago?
Yeah.
Eh? Your darling Harold Wilson.
Yeah.
Nah. He dropped a right pollock there, didn't he?
Elf used to use names and things of the politicians. he didn't live in Ruritania. He lived in that day, and we were almost among the headlines with the show, you know. I remember one in particular when we were doing one of the shows, actually recording it, and the Daily Mirror's headline was Kazijin refers to England as offshore island of Europe. And I phoned Dennis May Wilson and said, will you ask the cast if I can write the show in time? Will I do this one instead? Because he was then living at Claridge's, Kazijin. And I said, OK, and I wrote for all day and all night and got in with it and did some more work. They put the other show aside and did this one.
A tiny offshore island, which no longer has any pretensions to being a first division world power? Bloody rubbish! What's the matter? This paper's a bloody Labour rag! Oh, that's the last time that paper comes in this house! No, you don't want to read it neither. Bloody Labour rag, bloody anti-British rag.
Oh, what are you talking about?
Look, it's bad enough that Wilson inviting your cosy gin over here in the first place, isn't it? Now your Labour press turning traitor on us.
What was the influence of the series? I mean, did it actually change people's lives?
Well, I'd like to think for the better if it did. I mean, I like to think that it changed them for the worse, because if they did believe in Elf and accepted all what he said, I mean, that would have been not very good at all. But I think most of them, though, were laughing at him, and probably it provoked thought, and I think that was mainly the purpose of To Death and I think of Anything, is to provoke thought, get the debate going in the open, where you can take sides for or just talk about the thing, not sweep it under the carpet and make it doesn't exist.
They were tattered, they were torn, they were battered, they were worn. The old red flannel drawers that Maggie wore.
Ken Loach was right in saying there was no political or economic revolution in the 60s, but there was a cultural revolution, and strong echoes of that did come through on television. Above all, this was an age in which the British people developed the confidence to enjoy themselves, throwing off the mask of respectability.
Bloody disgusting, innit? Disgusting!
They were torn, they were battered, they were worn. The old red flannel drawers that Maggie wore. Oh, Maggie, Maggie, they have taken her away. And I'm walking from the streets of Liverpool. Oh, see, I'm on the line, and the sun refused to shine on the old red flannel drawers that Maggie wore.
Alert us at BBC I for your free weekly email listing all BBC TV and radio programmes on your chosen subject at bbc.co.uk/alert.
How would changing your colour change your life?
Oh, that's not me. You're like a different person.
Maybe the idea of putting this makeup on me was meant to make me feel like I'm a white person. Does that mean I should appear more confident?
Is race only skin deep?
I've started questioning myself. I think, well, I'm a racist.
Trading Races, next Tuesday and Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two.
What does it mean to be a young citizen of the United Kingdom in the 21st century? That's the question a bit later. First, an A to Z of politics for teenagers on BBC Learning Zone.
Let's ask the experts what they want from television.
I need something to get me right out of the classroom and across the world. What I need is to go back in time.
Marie-Claire, 17 ans, va être jugée pour avoir avorté. Comme 1 million d'autres femmes en France chaque année, Marie-Claire a vécu le drame de l'avortement clandestin. Parce qu'elle n'avait pas 2 000 francs, voire 3 000, pour aller avorter confortablement dans une clinique de Londres, de Genève ou même de Paris. Parce qu'elle n'a reçu aucune éducation sexuelle et qu'à 17 ans, il est très difficile d'obtenir d'un médecin un moyen contraceptif. Nous qui avons toutes compté les jours, nous avons déjà avorté ou sommes prêtes à le faire, nous qui voulons pouvoir décider de nos maternités, nous refusons que Marie-Claire soit condamnée, nous sommes prêtes à le dire devant le palais de justice de Bobigny le mercredi 11 octobre à 9h30. Signé des femmes.
Marie-Claire Chevalier was arrested and charged in 1972 with having had an abortion. Her mother, Michelle Chevalier, a worker on the Paris Metro, was also charged with procuring the abortion, along with 2 co-workers and the woman who carried out the abortion. The Chevalier family lived in Bobigny, a suburb on the outskirts of Paris, largely made up of high-rise buildings known as HLM. The daughter and the 4 women were put on trial in the shabby Palais de Justice at Bobigny. The Bobigny trial was the most dramatic and celebrated event in the campaign to legalise abortion in France. But how important can a single historical event like this really be, when compared, say, with the feminist movements, moderate and fundamentalist, or the increasingly powerful liberal tradition which already existed within the establishment, or indeed when compared to the great movements of change in the 60s and early 70s, which had turned abortion and contraception into major issues for debate across Europe and America. The British Family Planning Act of 1967 made contraception and contraceptive advice freely available, while in the same year abortion was legalised. Thus, French women who could afford it travelled to London for abortions. France had a very traditional attitude towards abortion and contraception, and the severely punitive 1920 Anti-Abortion Act was still in force. One of the few examples of change was the Neuwirth Law of December 1967, which legalised contraception. Then came the outburst of protest in 1968, the culmination of the process in which young people became actively involved in defying established authorities.
Big changes had occurred in this society as 1968, and there were a whole questioning of society by the youth, by a big movement that started in the university, and we had at the same time a huge strike movement among the workers that paralyzed this country. In the midst of all this, we had the creation of the movement of liberation of women, and they were the first actually to really put forward the necessity of liberating women, of letting women choose their lives if they wanted or not to have a child. If we wouldn't have had that movement of liberation, it's hard to know exactly how things would have occurred.
Joël Brunerie was a young doctor in France during the 60s and early 70s and a leading campaigner for abortion law reform.
Je crois que ce que nous avons acquis là, c'est nous avons perdu la peur de parler. Moi, je dois dire que jeune femme et jeune médecin en 67, on avait encore peur de parler des choses illégales. Et en particulier, nous avions très peur de l'avortement parce que la loi était très répressive. Nous avortions, bien sûr, toutes. Donc là, en 68, brusquement, je crois que le mouvement collectif a fait que les femmes se sont révoltées, ont exigé, et que les médecins ont eu peut-être moins peur. Et ça a libéré énormément de choses. Et nous avons eu aussi beaucoup moins peur de nos patrons de médecine. On a commencé à se prendre en main, nous aussi, les médecins, et à remettre en cause tout ce qui avait été édicté avant. Et puis aussi, il faut bien dire que parallèlement, dans les pays comme l'Angleterre, comme la Hollande, commençaient à se faire, beaucoup plus tôt que nous, des avortements médicaux. Donc nous commencions à envoyer les femmes qui avaient de l'argent dans ces pays. Et là, il se passait quelque chose de encore plus difficile, parce que les riches pouvaient aller en Angleterre et les pauvres continuaient à se débrouiller toutes seules. Et ça, c'est devenu insupportable.
Si elles se rendent en Angleterre, c'est que l'avortement n'y est plus considéré comme un délit. Alors qu'en France, il tombe toujours sous la loi de 1920.
But in a Catholic country, opposition to abortion remained very strong. Despite the Neuwirth Law of 1967, contraception was still not widely available. Therefore, the basic form of birth control for most women remained abortion. The Movement for the Liberation of Women, MLF, founded in August 1970, began at once to campaign for abortion law reform.
Je faisais l'analyse à l'époque qu'il y avait 800 000 avortements en France, c'est-à-dire presque autant que de naissances, et il faut rappeler quand même qu'une femme par jour en France mourait des suites de l'avortement clandestin. Une femme par jour, c'est-à-dire 365. Bon, cette comptabilité est terrible, mais une femme par jour mourait des suites de l'avortement clandestin.
Through its campaigns, the MLF made abortion an issue which the press could not ignore. At the same time, concern about backstreet abortions was growing among liberal members of the establishment. Simone Weil became President of the European Parliament in 1979. In the late 60s, she was a judge concerned about the 1920 abortion law.
Mais je vois, moi, à l'époque, j'étais magistrat, et depuis très longtemps, c'est un sujet que l'on discutait beaucoup entre magistrats, parce que nous étions très choqués de voir, tout d'abord, la situation d'un certain nombre de femmes. Donc c'était déjà un texte depuis très longtemps qui était contesté. Et on pouvait observer que même si on n'en parlait pas ouvertement, beaucoup de femmes en parlaient entre elles, dans tous les milieux, très, très ouvertement, mais ça divisait assez la société française.
Même cette loi férocement répressive.
Similar attitudes were to be found in other professions. Professor Jacques Monod was a Nobel Prize winner in physiology and medicine. But undoubtedly the lead was being taken by the MLF. It persuaded the famous left-wing magazine Nouvel Observateur to publish a declaration in April 1971 signed by 343 women stating that they had had abortions. Many of the names were of well-known actresses and literary figures. Following this, Association Choisir, a pressure group advocating women's right to choose, was formed by the distinguished barrister Gisèle Halimi.
Alors, nous avons fait ça comme une provocation pour que le pouvoir nous poursuive. Ce qu'il n'a pas fait, car les 343 étaient des femmes extrêmement célèbres. C'était Françoise Sagan, Catherine Deneuve, Delphine Seyrig, Simone de Beauvoir, Marguerite Duras, que sais-je. Donc, il n'y a pas eu de réaction. Mais d'autres femmes beaucoup plus humbles ont signé. C'est même moi qui ai recueilli, dans des meetings politiques de gauche, j'ai recueilli des signatures. Et elles ont été inquiétées par la police, menacées de poursuite. Alors avec Simone de Beauvoir, Delphine Seyrig, le professeur Monod, le professeur Rostand, nous avons décidé de fonder cette association Choisir pour qu'il y ait une solidarité presque juridique entre ces femmes et nous, en nous disant on ne touchera pas à une de ces femmes sans que nous battions à ses côtés. Et voilà comment l'association Choisir s'est battue pour la défense des femmes poursuivies pour avortement, la contraception et l'avortement, et surtout la modification de la loi répressive de l'avortement qui datait de 1920.
Association Choisir was run by powerful figures, among them the renowned writer and intellectual Simone de Beauvoir and medical scientist Professor Jacques Monod. Association Choisir, along with the MLF, campaigned vigorously for abortion law reform throughout the following year. But it was the Bobigny trial in October 72 which took the issue out of the world of feminist campaigners and into that of the public. Michelle Chevalier and her two co-workers were accused of helping Marie-Claire procure an abortion. Marie-Claire had been denounced to the police by her former boyfriend. In return, the police dropped charges of car theft against him.
Alors quand Marie-Claire et Michel sont venus dans mon cabinet, je me suis dit, c'était un procès, c'était un dossier exemplaire. Elles étaient courageuses, malheureuses. Michel Chevalier était une mère célibataire de 3 filles. Le monsieur avait fait les 3 filles et était parti. Elle élevait seule ces 3 filles comme employée de métro. Elle avait vraiment, il y a eu une solidarité autour de cette gosse. Je me suis dit, pourquoi ne pas en faire le grand procès de l'avortement? J'en ai parlé à Simone de Beauvoir et on avait déjà créé l'association Choisir et on s'est dit, c'est Choisir qui va prendre en main ce procès. Et ce que j'ai voulu faire, et je crois que l'on a réussi dans une certaine manière, c'était de faire ce que j'appelle un procès politique. Non pas au sens strict du mot, mais un procès politique, c'est un procès où l'accusé et ses avocats ne viennent pas demander pardon. Ils viennent expliquer leur acte et le revendiquer. Et par-dessus la tête des juges, on s'adresse à toute l'opinion publique du pays.
The case of Marie-Claire, 16 at the time of her arrest, was in itself a particularly touching one. The defence case involved bringing in a whole range of witnesses.
Le procès a été préparé avec l'association Choisir, Gisèle Halimi, les mouvements de libération des femmes, des groupes qui sont venus et ça n'a pas été facile la préparation de ce procès parce que à l'avance c'est difficile d'imaginer qu'un procès va être aussi exemplaire et aussi, c'est difficile à imaginer d'abord, c'est difficile à mettre en place, la stratégie, quels sont les témoins que l'on devait faire entendre, des discussions très vives ont eu lieu sur ce problème, des ruptures, les unes voulaient des femmes anonymes, Gisèle Halimi et Choisir voulait et je crois qu'elle a eu raison sur ce point, tout à fait, des hommes connus comme le professeur Monod, le professeur Millès, des médecins, le professeur Palmer, des actrices, Delphine Seyrig, Françoise Fabian, qui sont venues dire qu'elles avaient avorté. Je crois qu'en effet, c'était un procès charnière, un procès rupture, c'est vrai. Il y a eu avant le procès et après le procès.
MLF and Association Choisir organised demonstrations in support of Marie-Claire, inviting people to come to the Bobigny Palais de Justice. It's important to be clear, though, that there were 2 Bobigny trials. First, Marie-Claire alone with Maître Halimi on 11th October before a children's tribunal, consisting of a single judge and 2 advisors.
Marie-Claire avait 16 ans, donc elle était justiciable du tribunal pour enfants. Ça veut dire un seul juge, et ça veut dire le huis clos. Ni le public, ni la presse. Et Marie-Claire est venue dire au juge, moi je n'ai pas les moyens, et de toute manière je n'ai pas la volonté d'avoir un enfant. Je ne me sens pas capable d'avoir la responsabilité d'un enfant, et je ne voulais pas d'enfant. Et alors on a senti une espèce de très grande gravité dans l'atmosphère. On a senti un grand silence. On a senti tout à coup, j'ai senti que quelque chose quand même basculait, parce qu'en droit français, on ne peut pas reconnaître les faits et être acquitté. Vous pouvez avoir une peine minime, mais vous ne pouvez pas être relaxé. Vous êtes relaxé quand il n'y a pas de culpabilité. Or, elle reconnaissait qu'elle s'était fait avorter. Et le juge, alors, lui aussi, quand même, conscient que quelque chose d'important se passait, et il a prononcé la relaxe, c'est-à-dire l'acquittement de Marie-Claire.
Marie-Claire a été acquittée? Marie-Claire a été acquittée car on estime qu'elle n'avait pas délibérément choisi de commettre ce délit alors qu'elle l'a reconnu.
Ce n'est qu'un début, continuons le combat. Ce n'est qu'un début, le combat.
The second trial was held before 3 judges in open court. Though all reporting of proceedings was strictly prohibited, Alimi's strategy was to put the 1920 law on trial, representing it as discredited, inapplicable, and long overdue for abolition. She employed distinguished male witnesses. One of these was the devout Catholic Paul Millier.
J'ai volé au secours de cette malheureuse femme, receveuse de la RATP, dans une situation affreuse, qui n'avait probablement, d'après ce que j'ai compris, d'après ce que j'ai vu, aucune autre solution que celle qu'elle a adoptée. J'ai été au secours de la veuve et de l'orphelin, parce que je crois qu'il y a des cas où, malheureusement, la femme n'a pas d'autre recours. Cette fille de 15 ans et demi, il fallait l'aider, c'est bien sûr. Et je l'ai dit. J'ai dit que si sa mère était venue me voir, je l'aurais aidé.
Professor Milliez, despite being a religious man, was really very representative of a certain tradition in France, of the best, of enlightened men. Somehow he was a grand bourgeois. It cost as a person because he paid by not being elected to the Academy of Medicine because of the fights he had pulled through, he had supported, because of his dignity, because of his faithfulness to his own conception of society he had. And I think in that sense, you can say that on the right there are also people who have a certain kind of conception of tradition that takes its roots in Enlightenment in the 18th century. That's the best of France.
Along with Millier and Monod, Alimi enlisted the support of other scientists, Professor Raoul Palmer, gynecologist, and Professor Gérard Mendel, a neuropsychologist. Together they were a potent force.
C'était des médecins très respectés. C'était un groupe de médecins très différent de notre groupe de médecins de militants, de petits médecins non connus militants, mais c'était des gens extrêmement respectés, qui avaient déjà pris des positions pour d'autres choses, qui avaient été résistants. Et nous ne sommes pas très loin de la guerre encore à ce moment, hein. Ces gens sont connus. Et donc quand ces gens sont venus dire au procès qu'ils étaient pour le changement de la loi, ça a été très très important.
From the illicit transcript published 2 months later, we can quote Alimi's scorching concluding statement. Would you be willing, she asked the judges, to be brought before a tribunal of women because of what you do with your own bodies? It is your duty, she told them, to say that a new era begins in which the outdated is abandoned. There was a 2-week interval before the judgment was pronounced. Chevalier's 2 friends were simply acquitted. The actual abortionist was sentenced to 1 year in prison, immediately suspended. Madame Chevalier to the relatively small sum of 500 francs, but also immediately suspended. Total acquittals in all but name.
Je crois que les juges ont été troublés par ce débat qui a été fait et qu'il faut dire, ils n'ont pas fait ce... Je le regrette personnellement, je les ai engagés à faire le pacte, le saut qualitatif, prendre la responsabilité, c'est leur droit et c'est leur devoir. C'est aux juges de changer la loi et d'indiquer qu'elle ne peut plus être appliquée.
The press took the outcome of the trial as spelling the end for the 1920 law. But of course, the very story of young Marie Claire and her mother in itself had a tremendous emotional impact.
Un problème où il faut des replâtrages et des gens qui, parce qu'ils sont motivés, essaient de trouver des solutions pour d'autres. Et ça, c'est très très important que vous le compreniez. La France, en matière d'avortement, elle en est au Moyen-Âge.
Ça a eu un grand impact. Ça a eu un grand impact parce qu'on en a beaucoup parlé, que c'était une situation particulièrement injuste, puisque c'était vraiment une jeune femme très jeune qui vraiment avait beaucoup d'excuses pour ne pas le faire. C'était pas du tout une sorte, comme on a quelquefois présenté l'avortement, une commodité. Alors c'était une façon de projeter le phare de la misère des femmes dans ces situations, de leurs difficultés sur une très jeune femme à travers un procès qui est toujours quelque chose d'assez dramatique.
The first consequence of the trial was on public opinion. Both the press and the public were now prepared for the idea that the 1920 Act would have to be replaced. The media openly discussed the idea, helped by support from celebrities like Delphine Seyrig.
En somme, nous sommes des petites personnes inintelligentes, comme des petits chiens qu'on doit promener de telle heure à telle heure.
The second important effect of the trial was on politicians.
Donc tout ça s'est mis. Je veux dire, le choc en retour a été un choc politique, car tous les partis ont dû se déterminer, tous les partis étaient opposés, même les partis socialistes, communistes, tous. D'ailleurs, ils n'avaient pas voulu venir comme témoins à mon procès de Bobigny. Donc la classe politique dans son ensemble a voulu rester en dehors pour voir comment ça évoluait. Et après le procès de Bobigny, eh bien, elle a vu. C'était un véritable raz-de-marée. L'opinion publique ne supportait plus, à un point tel que entre le procès de Bobigny et le changement de la loi, il y avait d'autres procès. Eh bien, moi, je me suis présentée en disant « la loi est caduque. Nous ne plaiderons pas. » Et les juges n'ont pas jugé. On était à un certain moment dans un état de non-droit. On attendait le changement de la loi.
The third effect of the trial was on the women's movement itself. The trial led directly to the formation of MLAC, the movement for the liberalisation of abortion and contraception. MLAC organised protests and demonstrations. It openly helped women who wanted abortions to travel to England or Holland, rubbing government noses in the absurdity and injustice of the continuing situation in France.
Je pense que le MLAC, qui a été un mouvement tout à fait extraordinaire, qui était mixte, enfin où les femmes étaient majoritaires, dont j'étais la présidente de 73 jusqu'en 75. C'était un mouvement tout à fait extraordinaire parce que il y avait, c'était un mouvement où aucune exclusive, tout le monde, une grande solidarité. Ce sont les femmes qui voulaient avorter, qui nous ont fait travailler. Ce sont elles qui nous ont poussés. Elles venaient tellement nombreuses à nos permanences, à des situations, et de partout en France, à des femmes de tous âges, de toutes conditions, très pauvres.
MLAC also sponsored a documentary film about abortion. The film Histoire d'Art demonstrated a new simple technique for performing abortions, the Carman method. The documentary was banned. That in itself created more publicity and controversy.
Le côté rigide et pend, elle le passe à travers l'utérus. Alors avec un petit mouvement de va-et-vient, je vais gratter l'intérieur de l'utérus avec cette petite trappe qui est ici, qui n'est pas dure du tout, et petit à petit l'œuf.
In April 73, there was a public declaration by 331 doctors that they were prepared to carry out abortions. In addition, these doctors, along with other members of MLAC, carried out abortions outside hospitals using the new Carman method.
Mais nous avions décidé que nous ne faisions pas l'avortement pour 10 femmes, nous faisions l'avortement pour faire changer la loi. Et c'est ça qui a été très important. C'est que nous avons commencé à dire, aujourd'hui, dans tel hôpital, des journalistes, si vous voulez venir voir, interroger les femmes, nous allons faire des avortements devant tel hôpital, ou dans le jardin des plantes, ou à tel endroit. Là, c'est devenu complètement, nous sommes sortis de la clandestinité des premiers mois, et c'est devenu complètement public, et c'était quelque chose qui devenait impossible à gérer pour le gouvernement. C'était vraiment de la désobéissance, c'était nous faisons des avortements, maintenant si vous voulez nous mettre en prison, nous sommes 300, nous sommes 400, 500, parce que nous avions été rejoints. Donc le gouvernement est piégé. Et ces avortements, la pratique de ces avortements publics, connus de tous, a poussé la loi obligatoirement.
The Gaullist Pompidou government did respond to agitation and changing attitudes. It brought in a bill to allow abortions on the basis of decisions made by tribunals set up to assess each individual woman's case. There was violent opposition from MLAC and the MLF at what seemed like a mere delaying tactic and which didn't give women the right to decide for themselves. Because of Pompidou's death, the bill was abandoned. The new president, Giscard d'Estaing, though right-wing, saw himself as a representative of a new, youthful France which would pick up the legacy of the 60s and make a final break with Gaullism.
Et puisque c'est au Parlement de trancher, il ne m'appartient pas de le faire et de le faire à l'occasion d'une réunion de presse, mais je souhaite qu'il tranche dans un sens qui soit libéral et non répressif.
Giscard d'Estaing, à mon avis, le président le plus féministe que nous ayons eu, Je n'ai pas toutes ses idées politiques, mais il faut reconnaître que c'est lui qui a modernisé la société, instauré le divorce par consentement mutuel, fixé la majorité à 18 ans et fait voter la loi.
Giscard was totally committed to bringing in a new bill. For this, he deliberately chose the distinguished judge and moderate feminist Simone Weil. Simone Weil wanted a law which would bring order to a situation in which thousands of illegal and usually dangerous abortions were being carried out, but also one which left the decision entirely with the woman herself. She encountered massive opposition from her own right-wing majority in the National Assembly.
Je me rendais compte qu'il y avait une grande opposition de la part, d'abord, même pour avoir toutes les voix possibles, maximum, parce qu'il fallait que les voix de la gauche ne suffisaient pas, il fallait qu'à droite et au centre, j'ai le maximum de voix. Il fallait aussi, pour que la loi puisse être appliquée, qu'ensuite on puisse le faire dans les hôpitaux, dans de bonnes conditions. Donc ma stratégie a été non pas de parler d'un droit de la femme, mais d'une protection de la femme.
Quelques-unes payeront de leur vie ce geste de désespoir, et beaucoup d'autres seront atteints d'une stérilité ou d'un handicap qui assombrira toute leur existence. Que la vie, que la santé, que les futures maternités d'une femme soient liées de la sorte à son niveau socio-professionnel, c'est là une injustice insoutenable dont la majorité des citoyens est maintenant consciente et que nous ne pouvons plus tolérer parce que le sens de l'effort social contemporain est de réduire les inégalités devant la souffrance ou l'adversité.
The National Assembly debate took place in November 1974. Sensitive to the changes in public opinion, the Socialists and Communists now voted en bloc for the bill. So did 99 members of the right-wing majority. The new act, ratified in January 1975, legalized abortion before the 10th week, leaving women alone to make the decision. So how important was Bobigny? The legalization of abortion in France came about through a convergence of circumstances, one crucial event, and deliberate human actions. The 60s and early 70s were a time when everything was questioned, making it possible for significant minorities to challenge the 1920 law. The strategy of Gisèle Halimi and moderate feminists was brilliant. They were helped by rational judges and liberal elements within the establishment who were no longer willing to enforce a decrepit law. Throughout, fundamentalist feminists generated massive publicity and massive embarrassment for the politicians. Any government would have had to respond. As it happened, the new president, Giscard d'Estaing, was particularly anxious to do so. The single crucial event was the Bobigny trial, but the circumstances and the human responses also had to be right.
Depuis la nuit des temps, les femmes, nous sommes le continent noir, le monde aux femmes esclaves, et brisons nos entraves.
Contemplating a life apart on BBC Learning Zone now, as devotees from two very different communities reflect on the lives they lead.
Most religions provide in some way for those who want to make a full-time commitment to a devotional way of life. This is very often achieved through membership of monastic orders or devotional communities. The Anglican community of All Hallows in Suffolk was founded in the 1850s and still inhabits its 19th century convent. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness, known as ISKCON, was founded in the late 1960s. Its British headquarters are at the renamed Bhaktivedanta Manor in Hertfordshire. On the surface, both communities appear very different, one representing traditional Western religious practice. The other, with its origins in India, representing a relatively new religious movement in the West. Despite their very different belief systems, there are many similarities in their commitment to a devotional way of life. It is these continuities which this programme will be investigating. It seems appropriate to start by finding out what the religious motivations are underpinning life in both communities.
We believe that the monastic order today is just as relevant as the monastic orders when they first began. It is a work of prayer, and we believe that our work springs from our prayer. The prayer life sustains, nourishes, and hopefully helps us in our discernment of what is God's will for the community. Our work is an overflowing of our love of God into the people and the world around us. But ultimately, we're here because we believe God called us here.
What we have in common with lay people who believe in God and are, say, more than nominal Christians is the basic Christian belief in God the Father, the Creator, God the Son, who is simply God in human flesh with a human face, redeeming, living within us and living with us, and God the Holy Spirit, by whom that life is actually transmitted to us and keeps us going and powers us. When we were baptised, we all had that promise made for us, and when we were confirmed, we took it on ourselves and said, yep, that's right, I still believe it. And when we make our religious profession, all we're doing is ratifying that baptismal commitment and vowing to live it out in a particular, shall we say, accentuated way. It's a bit like a stage makeup will accentuate a person's natural features just to put across a truth of some sort. And I think that's what the monastic life or the religious life is doing.
Our natural tendency is towards service. So here we practice serving the Supreme Lord. The deities on the altar are actually the centre of the manor, and all the residents here practice serving the Supreme Lord. And by that service we actually develop love for God. Religion isn't seen as something made up by man, or a saint, or a prophet. They're underlying laws which may be revealed in much the same way as people, scientists, Newton discovered the law of gravity. Of course, it wasn't necessarily his law, it was already existing, but he discovered it and therefore got credit. So there are laws that go on. That is the idea of Sanatan Dham. Of course, it means the eternal religion, because the idea is the Atma, or the self, is eternal. God is also eternal. The soul has got nothing to do with this body. In other words, it's not white, it's not male, it's not middle-aged, it's not English, it's not even Christian, Jewish, Muslim or Hindu. These designations apply to the body, not to the soul proper. Or to speak of God, we identify with the body. And in this way we transmigrate from one body to another body, according to our desires and according to our deserves. So therefore, if we perform pious activities, we're elevated, we may go up to the heavenly planets. And if we perform what are called pap, sinful activities, we're degraded into the lower species and gradually become purified till we become human beings again. Then we have that choice. Human life is a life of responsibility, which the animals don't have. Their diet, their sexual activities, everything is dictated through instinct. But as human beings, we have great scope for choice. Choice means responsibility. And by proper use of that choice, proper use of our free will, our independence, we gradually are granted more and more freedom. So therefore those in the heavenly planets have a great amount of freedom. It is said that some of them can fly in the air without the aid of machines. Whereas if we misuse our independence, then it'll be taken away from us. Right? Here you are, here's a dog's body, bark like a dog. No choice.
So the next stage is to find out if there are any similarities in how people join the different communities.
The way people get to hear of us is, well, it varies. Some people have actually seen us on television. Some have heard about us from other people. Some have possibly come on a visit with a group. The bush telegraph's very, very effective. We'll usually encourage them to visit other communities as well as ourselves, because we're not the only community in Anglicanism. If they're still interested, and it still looks quite feasible, we'll ask them to come and live alongside us, sharing the work and the timetable of the novices. And then, given that they still feel that this is the right place to be putting down roots, they will actually ask to join. You have to fill out an application form, and you have to provide names and addresses of referees, and you have to provide a medical report. So, given that all the paperwork's satisfactory, they're admitted as postulants, which is simply from the Latin word postulo, which simply means I ask. That state of life can go on from between 4 to 12 months. Then if it seems right, they will be made novices and given this habit and a white veil. That does give them a deeper sense of fellowship with the community. At some stage during their novitiate, which can last from 2 to 3 years, we keep a watching brief, and provided that goes all right, they'll actually make their first vows in community for a period of 3 years in the first instance. The norm is for someone to go forward after 3 years in first vows to life profession, and then eventually they get put up for election, and this time it's a 2/3 majority, and you make your vows for life in the community. You're committing yourself to the community, and within the community to God.
Initiation usually occurs at least 2 or 3 years after the devotees had some serious initial contact with the organization now. The way we're going is that actually more and more of our members are getting initiated without having to move into the community. They stay in their homes, practice Krishna consciousness, follow the principles, and then become initiated. More and more there's an emphasis on making sure that the person is actually ready to make that commitment with the lifelong, irretractable vows. In the early days, we rushed into it a little. There's 2 stages of initiation. The first initiation is called Harinam, when one receives the holy name. That's the Hare Krishna mantra. And the second initiation is Brahman initiation, when one receives the sacred thread. We wear this thread which is draped over the left shoulder, and we receive that at the time of second initiation.
It seems clear that in both communities a distinctive dress code is followed. What's the reason for this?
The main purpose of the clothes is related to identity, to remind us of our identity and to remind others of who we are and whom we represent. After all, even if someone doesn't feel too favourably towards us, it's likely they'll mention Krishna, which is a name for God. So we are representing a tradition. Therefore, this in one sense is our uniform. It also helps us to remember who we are.
I feel, and this is only a personal opinion, but I think a good many others would bear me out, that the habit does give us some degree of homogeneity, a sense of identity with the God who calls us and with the calling. So I wouldn't want to go as far as to say my habit is me and I'd fall to bits if I wasn't wearing one. But there is a sense in which I personally feel that if I went into mufti, I'd actually be disguising what I'm really about and what God is about to me. There is the witness value. You can also lay yourself open to an awful lot nowadays, unfortunately quite obscene slogans being yelled after you, especially in some of the inner cities. Other people out there actually find the habit a challenge, a welcome, a sign that somehow there are people still around who believe in God like they do, and an encouragement.
If vows are taken in joining each community, how do they differ?
People do ask us about the vows, and they ask us what they're about. We're all called as Christians to be poor in spirit. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And our way of living out our vow of poverty in every way, poverty of relationship, poverty money-wise, is simply our response to that basic Christian call. Celibacy, which is always a bit of a thorny one, is a response that we all make to remain chaste, single-minded in our love of each other and of God, and the celibacy of the religious life is just one particular way of applying that. And then our obedience within community, simply as a community listening to what God's telling us and asking of us. It's articulated very often by the mother or others in authority. It's simply our way of responding to the basic command of the gospel, turn to Christ in his obedience to the Father. It sounds all very highfalutin, and it sounds very easy on one level just to trot it out like that, but it's a lifetime's commitment actually, and trying to get it together and trying to get even within any distance of achieving it. What you're also vowing by implication is a stability that will see you right the way through, which really comes from God, so you're vowing trust as much as anything.
There are 5 vows we take. The first vow is to chant 16 rounds of the Hare Krishna mantra on our beads each day. The beads consist of a total of 108 beads. Actually, there's 109, but we don't chant on this one. And we chant the Hare Krishna mantra once on each bead. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And then move on to the next bead. So 1 round is 108 mantras, and we take a vow to do 16 rounds each day. That's 1,728 mantras. Usually takes 2 or perhaps 3 hours each day. That's the first vow. Then there are 4 prohibitions, 4 restrictions. They're called regulative principles. The first is to avoid eating any meat, fish or eggs. Secondly is to avoid sex outside of marriage and to avoid sex within marriage unless it's for procreation. Third vow is that we avoid all forms of intoxication, alcohol, drugs, even tea or coffee. And the 4th regulative principle is we avoid all forms of gambling, even the lottery.
Both communities centre around acts of devotion. How do they differ from one another?
In our particular order, we go to chapel 6 times a day to recite the daily offers. It's a repetition of the Psalms more than anything, which goes into us far deeper. That sustains us to be more fully present to the world. Prayer is a language of love. It's love of God and love of our fellow creatures. We believe that when we pray, that God actually hears and acts. Prayer changes us in the process. I believe it makes us more sensitive to what's going on. It makes us more aware of what's happening in the world. And our work then changes accordingly.
Our community motto is Semper Orantes, Semper Laborantes. And that actually means always praying and always working. And we feel very much that the work flows from the prayer. And this is why we meet regularly in chapel, as though we sort of tune in again to get our selves earthed to God, if you like. It's a funny way of putting it, mixed metaphors, but you know what I mean.
Chanting and meditation is an ancient process practiced all over the world, especially in India for thousands of years. And the most practical method recommended is, in this particular day and age, is chanting. Chanting means chanting the name of God. And within this tradition, within ISKCON, we chant the holy names of God, who we consider to be Krishna or Lord Ram. So chanting is basically a form of prayer, praying to God to become His servant. Within the Hindu tradition, there's different methods and different chants which are recommended. But for this particular age, which is known as Kali Yuga, or the age of evil and hypocrisy, one method is recommended, which is chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, which is known as the Maha Mantra.
Krishna consciousness means to be every second of the day, if possible, conscious of Krishna. Internally, always absorbed in thought of the Supreme Person.
Are there any similarities in the way the day is spent in these two communities?
Regulation is very important for us, that actually our activities, the time we rise, the time we go to bed, our eating and so on, these activities are regulated. And there's a lot of emphasis on discipline. The day begins at 4:30 in the morning till 8:30, and that involves chanting and some dancing, yes, at 4:30 in the morning. And that Arti ceremony, Arti is the name, of course, of the most common ceremony in the broad tradition of Hinduism. That Arti is called the Mangal Arti or the auspicious Arti, because within the tradition it's considered extremely important to actually be awake and doing one's spiritual practices in those morning hours, those auspicious morning hours. That is followed by worship of Tulsi, the sacred plant. Then that is followed by our japa meditation, which goes on for about 1 hour and 40 minutes. And hopefully we chant a good deal of our rounds in that time. That's followed then by what we call the greeting of the deities. The deities during our meditation period are being dressed, and they're being dressed in their day outfit. And then at 7 o'clock the curtains open for darshan, greeting of the deities. That is followed by Guru Puja, which is worship of the spiritual master. The spiritual master is seen as a representative of God, not God. But because he represents God, then the worship and honor and respect and love, which is normally due to God, should be given to the spiritual master. During the day, we're engaged in service. And there is a wide range of services that go on within the community, and as devotees go out into the world. So there's working on our farm, there's cooking, we have a school, there's the education department, there's working on the altar as a priest, and so on.
Each day we begin our day with prayer. So we all gather in chapel at 20 to 7 in the morning for the first office of the day, which is called Lauds, which means praise. And this is followed at 7:15 by the Eucharist, Holy Communion. And we then have breakfast, and individuals do different things depending on where they're working. We meet again for prayer at 9:30, and we meet again at 12, at 1:45, and then at 5:15 for meditation, followed by Vespers, and we finish the day with prayer with compline at 8:45. In between that time, it does depend on where each sister is working as to how her day pans out. So if you're in the kitchen, you could be spending most of your day cooking, washing up, preparing meals. Guest house work, often seeing to visitors, not necessarily getting to all the offices. The person who makes the habits is sewing most of the day. And during the morning, we try to take an hour prayer time. And in the afternoon or evening, half an hour spiritual reading. So it can vary considerably, and it's extremely flexible now, more so than it used to be. And if you're working in a branch house in the city of Norwich, you probably won't get all those offices in at all. The day is spent caring for people or whatever, and the same goes for our nurses in the hospital.
Yeah. Good.
So we're coming.
It becomes hard work, doesn't it?
In the last 25 years, I've seen tremendous change. The habit was very voluminous. We had stiff headdresses, which kept the custody of the eyes. The children always used to think our wimples were cardboard. The food has changed. We only ate what was provided in the gardens. We never bought anything like pasta, which occasionally appears on the menu now. And the whole emphasis and the way of the religious life here has altered considerably. There's a lot more freedom, we're not so restricted. It's interesting too that when I first joined 25 years ago, we'd have no cameras in the community, not even a camera to take a snapshot, and no outsiders came in. It was very much an enclosed community. And in fact, when the convent was built, there was a wall round it, and people only went out if they needed to go somewhere desperate, and then it was in an enclosed carriage. But in my time, it has opened up considerably. We now have people helping in our kitchens, helping with cleaning, so the sisters are freer to talk to the visitors who are coming more and more for pastoral needs and times of silent retreat, what we call spiritual direction.
I think what was significant in the beginning was joining the faith, if you like to call it faith. I'm not too happy with that word, but joining the faith, I'll use it anyway, was very much synonymous with joining the community. And there was really little validated interaction with the society that went on for those who were living outside. Of course, from the beginning there was some members of the Hindu community who became attracted here, but that was always seen as a lower option. Those who were really interested in spiritual life lived inside the community. In the early days, the needs of the society and the mission were foremost in people's minds. And the needs of the individual were not really taken into account, separate from the mission. More recently, we've realized that if we're going to actually push on the mission of Krishna consciousness, because in one sense it is missionary, then we need to look after its greatest resource, namely the devotee, and particularly the devotee who shows the greatest commitment to the society, especially those perhaps living in this community. Therefore, we've tried to synthesize these two concerns, how to fulfill the needs of the individual and those of the mission. And the way we're doing this is to be very clear about the expectations on both sides when a candidate approaches us for residential training. That means pretty well to live in the community. We're very clear about what the society can offer that person and what it cannot. And we're also very clear in saying now that you're only coming for a limited amount of time. And we're not sure how long that'll be. We'll have to see. And we will not be able to look after you, as it were, eternally. You won't just join the organization and then you can wash your hands of all responsibilities. No, we're here to train self-reliant and responsible men and women who can stand on their own feet, who can take what they've learned while they've been here and then apply it in the world.
Finally, what are the differences between the ways these two religious communities relate to the wider world?
Because we're very isolated here, we could look as though we're totally out of touch with what's happening in the world outside. Most of the older sisters in particular, and a few of the younger sisters, do watch the news. And I think that becomes part of their prayer, part of their intercession. As a convent, we are actually members of Pax Christi and Amnesty International. There's a sort of group membership. We do have a sister on behalf of the community who works in justice and peace. She's training to speak on these issues, and she's collects information about, for instance, the landmine problem, torture, discrimination, racial, creedal or whatever. And she keeps us informed, and she puts up notices up in the cloister for our information and in the sisters' room.
I think there are certain distinct contributions that Bhaktivedanta makes to society. It particularly serves the ethnic Hindu community in terms of providing priests for certain life events, marriages and so on. Many Hindu communities have to rely on bringing in their pujaris or purohits, their priests from India, whereas we're actually training priests here in England. And those priests will be from a Western background and from an Asian background. As far as the Manor's contribution to broader society, there is a Food for Life programme which goes out daily to feed the homeless and needy in and around London. And this is a programme which was started in India 15 or 20 years ago now, and is going on in most of the major countries throughout the world. My spiritual master said that no one within 10 miles of any of our centres should go hungry. And this is vegetarian food, which distinguishes it perhaps from other agencies which do similar good work.
Blessed art thou among them, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of death.
Learn another language, find a new career, improve your computing skills. Do it all with BBC Learning Zone. Find out more at bbc.co.uk/learning zone.
How would changing your colour change your life?
Oh, that's not me.
You're like a different person. Maybe the idea of putting this makeup on me was meant to make me feel like I'm a white person. Does that mean I should appear more confident?
Is race only skin deep?
I've started questioning myself. I think, well, I'm a racist.
Trading Races, next Tuesday and Wednesday at 9 on BBC Two.
The thing about paying your TV licence by direct debit is that it's a great way of spreading the cost.
Right, so how did
Do you know how little it can cost a month?
Yes, I do.
Have a guess.
But I know.
No, but have a guess, though.
No, but I know the answer. It's just over £9 a month.
No, but have a guess.
Well, all right, £15.
£15? That's rubbish.
Okay, 12. No, 300.
To find out how little it can cost to pay your television licence by direct debit, call 0800 328 2020. And to give you a start, the answer's just over £9 a month.
Good morning, this is BBC Two with cbbc.
Morning! Hello, you're watching The Breakfast Show here on cbbc on 2. Now, I thought this morning, we'd have a bit of fun. Right? Okay. Now, this is what I'm talking about, okay? This is the buzzer. I brought it in this morning because you say right loads. Do it? Yeah, so I thought we're going to buzz you every time you say it so I can stop you saying it this morning. All right. No, I didn't know it's No, we've started this. Right, okay. So I can say it as much times as I like, by the way. Oh, and I can? No. What's coming up? We've got Monster Rancher and Sheep. Oh, is that it? Yeah. All right then, but first, it's time for the Animal Magic Show. See, that's not right. Oh, I was playing with you. It's Prince of Atlantis.